Hello and welcome to another episode of Snakes Territory. I'm Jesse Friedman alongside Jack Sommers. And Jack, we are back here on another sort of sad postseason and yet not postseason edition of Snakes Territory. The postseason is happening, but of course the Diamondbacks are not in it. And we are just here once again to talk about some off-season topics that we want to get to. And of course, on this episode, we are doing that through the lens of all of your mailbag questions. So we very much appreciate everybody, both on Twitter and on Reddit, who submitted questions for this episode. Unfortunately, we get way too many when we do this. We don't have enough time to get to everyone, but we really appreciate everybody submitting, and hopefully we circle around to everyone as the offseason goes on. Jack, we are going to start with a question that I think it is very appropriate to ask. It is very reasonable, something you and I have been thinking about lately. This comes from MetaBoss24 over on Reddit, and they say, my current guess is that since Torey Lovullo and Mike Hazen are in a sort of make the playoffs or you're fired year, what are some of the bolder choices that Hazen might make to try and make the playoffs, also assuming the reported payroll cut as well? Jack, I'll give you the first shot at this one. What comes to your mind?
Well, I think the question was very well framed, and I believe that because of the fact that there's going to, yes, be a payroll cut. We don't know exactly how big it's going to be, but I think we can assume it's going to be at least 10 to 20 million less than it was last year. Hopefully it's not more than that. I came in when I crunched the numbers at about $40 to $50 million tops that they might have to spend this year. I'd err on the lower side there. So that clearly limits their ability to do a lot via free agency. So I do believe that Hazen will be bold. I do believe that they need to make the playoffs next year. If they don't make the playoffs next year, then Torey Lovullo is certainly gone. And who knows if Mike Hazen gets to stay till 2028 if that happens. So I think that he's going to be very aggressive with trades. I think that he's going to move quite a number of prospects. How high he goes on that really depends a lot on the other teams. What are they asking for? It's not as simple as to say, well, so-and-so is untouchable. If you really want a guy, you may have to cough up a guy that you might have otherwise thought was untouchable. And so that's what I expect to see happen. I do expect Mike Hazen to be aggressive with trades. He kind of hinted at that a little bit at his postseason presser. It didn't exactly confirm that, but that's me reading the tea leaves a little bit.
And of course, it might not just be trading prospects, but maybe that looks like trading some guys off the major league team as well. We've talked about the possibility of trading Ketel Marte. That wouldn't shock either one of us at this point. I'm not sure I'm totally yes, 100% sure the D-backs are trading Ketel this offseason. But yeah, I mean, when you have $40 to $50 million to spend, whatever that number is, and you're losing as much as the D-backs are off their major league roster this offseason, I mean, the math just doesn't really work in your favor. It just isn't really possible for the D-backs to fill all these holes via free agency alone. So I'm right there with you, Jack. I think the trade market, the D-backs are going to be busy in the trade market this offseason, and given the situation that both Mike and Torey are in, it really would not surprise me at all if the D-backs were pretty aggressive on that front. That brings us to our next question, kind of switching gears here a little bit, but staying on the topic of pitching, which is certainly going to be something, if the D-backs are in the trade market, certainly going to be a point of emphasis for them. This one is also over on Reddit. How is Kaplan regarded by the players and the front office in his first year? Are they keeping him around because they feel he's a commodity, or just because they figure things can't be any worse in year two? Additionally, to what extent is it being discussed that we have a clear problem with pitching development in the organization? Jack, I'm curious your thoughts here, having attended some of the pressers late in the season, but my initial thought is that I don't think they're keeping him around just because they think he can't, things can't be any worse in year two. I imagine that they're factoring in all of the injuries that happened this season. And I think they're also factoring in the fact that, Zac Gallen really turned things around in the second half. And Ryan Nelson did have a really good year. I don't think you can blame all of the pitching issues on the pitching coach when it was pretty clear there just wasn't really enough talent on the roster to weather all these injuries.
I believe that's true. It's very difficult, even for us who, get to speak to the manager every day, get to speak to the coaches, get to speak to the players, to still tease out exactly the positive or negative impacts of the pitching coach. And sometimes we don't find out who liked who and what the relationship was until after the fact. My sense is that most of the pitchers liked Brian Kaplan. I think they enjoyed working with him, even though the results weren't good overall for the pitching staff this year. Now, I'm not certain of that. I just don't have enough of a handle on exactly what he did and didn't do that resonated with the pitchers. With veteran guys, it's really tough. Like, you're not going to change their mechanics. You're not going to change Eduardo Rodriguez's mechanics or his approach to pitching very much. No veteran pitching coach is really going to get a guy like that. I mean, I think their influence is greater on the younger pitchers to begin with. That's my sense of it. Early on, I think Zac had a lot of really positive things to say about Brian Kaplan. He never really wavered from that. So I don't think he had any issues with him. So, look, I remember, D-backs had a rough pitching year in 2016 with Mike Butcher, and then they had one of the best pitching years in franchise history with the same pitching coach in 2017. Then the bullpen fell apart in 2018, and his 3-year tenure as a pitching coach ended. He wasn't the most popular guy amongst fans, but he had a really great pitching season sandwiched in between two mediocre ones. And it's really tough to pin down how much is the responsibility of the pitching coach and how much is just the talent that he's given to work with and how healthy they are.
Yeah, very well said. It feels like at the end of the day, a lot of coaching jobs are just like, well, regardless of how much responsibility you legitimately did or did not have, you're just kind of the fall person if things don't go well. And if things go really well, then you get all sorts of praise that, frankly, might not necessarily have really been your doing. Maybe your team just had a really good pitching season and you didn't get in the way of it, but you didn't necessarily help it along either. Really hard to get into the nitty gritties of those kinds of things. It's why the Manager of the Year award is still in my mind just like an impossible thing to vote on. Like, none of us actually know how much managers are contributing to or maybe against the success of their teams. It's just not something that we just don't have enough information as reporters to really answer those questions well. I feel like the pitching coach is often a similar situation. Of course, Jack, we mentioned the injuries and how big of a factor those were this season. We got a question along those lines from Nick Johnson 0320 over on Reddit. Nick said, if we are being realistic, when should we expect Martinez, Burns, and Puck to come back? What would be the optimistic outlook? Jack, I know you heard recently that Corbin Burns is looking to target the All-Star break as a return date, which is fairly aggressive given when he had the surgery. And then we certainly expect AJ Puck to be ahead of Justin Martinez in his return program. Puck, of course, had the brace procedure, whereas Martinez had the full Tommy John.
And interestingly, Tori had told us that, Blake Walston's already throwing, and amongst the Tommy John or elbow surgery guys, AJ Puck was the next guy up to start throwing, then Burns and Martinez, and then Tommy Henry last. So amongst the 5 guys that are on the 40-man roster, or that were on the major league roster when they got injured, that's the timeline for beginning their throwing programs. So Blake Walston already started his, and I would presume that AJ Puck, if he hasn't yet, will begin very soon. Because it was the brace procedure, Puck was expected to be a 12 to 13 months tops guy, and he had his surgery in May. So he should be back, sometime around the All-Star break as well. So they could be getting Puck and Burns back at the same time. Justin Martinez was a full Tommy John elbow reconstruction, and his timeline is at least a couple months behind those guys. I really realistically don't expect Justin Martinez back before September 1st.
I think that's fair. And it's also, even though you do expect Corbin Burnes and AJ Puck to return well before then, you never really know what you're going to get out of these guys when they have, when they come off elbow surgery. Like, are we expecting Corbin Burnes to be peak Corbin Burnes in the second half next year? You certainly hope he can eat some innings, he can be productive, but you probably shouldn't be expecting an ace caliber pitcher in the second half of the season. And I know with Puck in particular, Jack, like the Diamondbacks have a decision to make there with him being a guy who is due arbitration. I don't have the number in front of me, but you could make a case the Diamondbacks should look at non-tendering AJ Puck, given that you're not going to have him for at least the first couple months of the season, and when he does come back, it's a bit of a wild card what you're going to be able to get from him.
Yeah, I believe AJ was making 2.935 or something like that in this past year in arbitration. So he's going to get a bump. How much, even though he didn't pitch much this year, it's based on service time, and he still gets all that service time. He's definitely getting a bump, whether it's 500,000 or $1 million. I mean, and you're not going to get the guy back until mid-July probably. And you don't know what he's going to be when he comes back. So yeah, and I just really want to caution everybody and follow up with what Jesse said. I mean, anything you get from any of these guys in 2026 is a bonus. I'm not expecting anything great from Corbin Burnes, Justin Martinez, or AJ Puck in 2026. It's not just about when they come back; it's how they come back, how long it takes them to build up strength and truly be effective. And generally, you're looking at a ways beyond their initial reappearance in the majors before they actually get back to being who they once were. It's 2027 for Corbin Burnes, and whether or not he opts out at that point, I don't think he will, but given everything else that's happened, but we'll see. AJ Puck will be a free agent. Justin Martinez is signed to a extension, and they actually will get some extra time on that because of the missed time because of injury. At the back end, I think they have some advantages on the option scene. They get one extra year of control on the back end should he have needed Tommy John, which he did.
Right.
So I think I really wouldn't expect much from any of them in 2026. Anything you get's a bonus, and be happy with it. Don't have expectations there.
The AJ Puck arbitration estimate is $3.3 million. That coming from MLB Trade Rumors today. They just released their arbitration estimates here within the past few hours. I'm pretty confident the D-backs will pick that up. I would be pretty shocked if they didn't. I think AJ Puck is theoretically an impactful reliever enough that even if it's just for a few months, like that's a chance you're probably willing to take. I mean, let's face it, $3.3 million doesn't get you much at all on the open market in free agency. So if that could potentially get you a back end guy for the final few months of the season, that's probably a gamble the Diamondbacks are willing to take there. Last question here, Jack, before we hit a break. This is from Geraldo Perdomo's biggest fan over on Twitter. Who do you think is more likely for us to sign, Zac Gallen or Merrill Kelly? Is there any situation where we get both? Well, we discussed the possibility of re-signing Merrill Kelly in our last episode, Jack. People haven't heard that one yet. A good idea to go back and hear our thoughts on where we think the market might ultimately land for Merrill. But in terms of getting both of these guys potentially, Jack, it's really hard for me to see that happening. It seems like bringing back Merrill Kelly is probably the more likely option there.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact is that he'll be cheaper than Zac, and he'll also require less of a time commitment. In my article that I wrote following up our discussion last time, I really came to the conclusion that he would get something like 1 year, $12 million with a second year option for $12 million, or a $3 million buyout, which would guarantee that first year at $15 million. And then with potential escalator clauses based on starts made. So maybe or starts or innings. So maybe that second year option becomes more valuable, or maybe it becomes a player vesting option. So if he makes 25 starts, maybe that second year, 12 million jumps to 14 million, and Merrill gets the choice to whether or not to exercise that or go into free agency. Some think Jordan Montgomery's type deal. So that's kind of where I landed there, and that's whatever that turns out to be. I mean, it could be a little more than that, a little less. I could be off, but it's certainly going to be less money and less time than Zac is going to require. Where the bottom line for Zac is 4 years, 80 million, I believe. It could be more, but I don't think it's going to be any less than that. So I don't think that they'll choose Zac over Merrill in this instance if they're interested in Merrill in the first place, which we don't know. And certainly not both. There's no way they bring them both back.
It seems basically impossible. I mean, it would cost $35 million at the very least, I think, to bring both guys back for next year. That's pretty much all the money the D-backs have to spend, and obviously they have other needs. I also don't know if spending $20 million on Zac Gallen per year for 4 years it's just hard to know exactly what you're getting there. I mean, with the season that Gallen just had, there's going to be some risk for whatever team signs Gallen. I'd be pretty surprised if the D-backs bring him back in general. I think Merrill Kelly's the more likely route. He's very likely going to be more affordable, as you said, on a per year basis, and then he also is going to require a shorter contract, certainly. So those things put together, Merrill, I'm with you there, is the more likely of the two in my mind. We have a whole lot more to get to, including how high might the Diamondbacks shoot in their search for a starting pitcher next season? Beyond Zac and Merrill Kelly, are there some bigger name starters around the league that the Diamondbacks could pursue via trade or in free agency? We're going to get into that and a whole lot more on the other side of this break.
October baseball is here. The pressure's on, the lights are brighter, and with DraftKings Sportsbook, you're right there in the middle of every moonshot moment. New customers bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get paid out $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FOUL. That's code FOUL to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, fees may apply in Illinois. 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bet must win to receive reward. Minimum minus 500 odds required. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
We were talking earlier about the pressure that Torey Lovullo and particularly Mike Hazen this offseason will face, knowing just what's at stake for this team right now. This question is sort of along those lines. It comes from Corbin Barrels over on Reddit. With Corbin Burnes being out for a majority of the season, do you think the Diamondbacks will be in on any of the frontline starters in free agency or possibly trade for an ace? I think if they are serious about being competitive, they have to get an ace. Cannot afford to roll out 4 or 5 middle of the rotation arms. Jack, I think this question is very fair. I think it is very reasonable. If the Diamondbacks do not land a frontline starting pitcher going into next year, I think it's pretty clear that they just wouldn't have one at that point. Ryan Nelson, certainly no disrespect to him. He had a great season, but I don't know if we're really putting him in an ace tier of pitcher, or even, I guess ace is kind of a subjective word. Frontline starter, that's kind of a subjective phrase as well. But I think Ryan Nelson has a little bit more to prove before you'd put him in that category. Jack, where do you stand on this?
I agree with the premise that if they're just rolling out 4 or 5 mid-tier starters and they don't have anybody that's able to step forward and be that frontline guy, even if they somehow made the postseason, it's how are you going to do anything when you get there? I mean, as we're seeing this year, I mean, really good starting pitching has been dominating in the postseason, and you still need it. I mean, the D-backs in 23, they got really good starting pitching in the postseason when they actually had a starter out there and not throwing a bullpen game. Merrill Kelly was excellent. Brandon Pfaadt stepped up. later on in the postseason. I mean, Zac Gallen took a no-hitter into the 6th or 7th inning in the World Series, even though he struggled against the Phillies. So, look, I think that they definitely need a top-line guy. Now, we just got done talking about how they can't really afford to sign both Merrill and Zac. But we did look at some options. These are not all the options. This is not in any way intended to be a comprehensive list. I'm throwing types out there. So this is the last 2 years combined. There's a chart on the screen, and there's 4 pitchers: Ranger Suarez, Dylan Cease, Michael King, and Tyler Mahle. So in Ranger Suarez, I mean, he's the top of that group. He's put up 7.4 baseball reference WAR over the last 2 years, across over 300 innings and a 3.33 ERA. Clearly, he's going to be one of the top free agent starters. He's going to be 30 years old. The other thing I was limiting with this list is I wanted guys that were only going to be 30 or 31 years old entering free agency. I didn't want 32, 33, 34-year-olds. Dylan Cease, interestingly, there's an article up on Arizona Diamondbacks on SI discussing a Bleacher Report article that named Dylan Cease as a good fit for the D-backs. And it compared him with Zac Gallen. Similar innings pitched, similar ERA, same age. So why Dylan Cease over Zac Gallen? And quite frankly, I think it's because he's got the better stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, he throws, mid to high 90s fastball. He's just got more devastating stuff at this point in his career. His, FIP and peripherals, xERA, all of that is much better than Zac's over the last couple seasons. So, if he could be gotten for 480 versus Zac for 480, I'd certainly go after Dylan Cease. I think it's going to take a little more than that. I would think that Dylan Cease is probably going to get 7 figures, but we'll see. Michael King, when healthy, has been very good, and a lot of people are very interested in him. Of course, he's more risky because of his injury history, but in 247 innings only, he's got 5.2 WAR and a 3.1 ERA. And then I tacked on kind of like a make-good guy, Tyler Mahle, who's been very good when healthy. Over the last 2 years, he's only made 19 starts and thrown 99 innings. But he's got a 2.54 ERA, put up a couple of WAR, 2.2 WAR in basically what amounts to a little slightly more than half a season. He had a really good couple of years back with Cincinnati before the injury bug hit him. So if they go out and say they actually spend on a high-end starter and they still need a second guy, Mahle might only cost them like $5 million. So he would be possibly a good second ad. So these are free agent targets, where Mahle's kind of slotting in behind an ace as far as your signees. So that doesn't cover the trade market. Now, Jesse, you had some thoughts about potential trade targets.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are at least a few options that they could consider. I know later on we'll answer a question specifically about Joe Ryan and Sandy Alcantara, if those guys could be options for the Diamondbacks. I think in the bigger picture, like solving this problem via trade feels more realistic to me than solving it via free agency. I mean, if you are really going after a frontline guy, then it's going to be hard to do that in free agency with the money the D-backs have to spend. I mean, we know that at times we've thought the D-backs had a certain amount to spend going into the offseason, and then they wound up blowing through that. That's certainly what happened last offseason when they signed Corbin Burns. But I have to wonder, Jack, if the leash on those types of deals is shortening a bit. I mean, this team's track record is not exactly pristine when it comes to some of those higher ranked starting pitchers. You think about Bumgarner and Montgomery and Eduardo Rodriguez and how these moves have worked out. I know Mike Hazen has been clear that he still wants to be a contender in that space, that he's not done signing top free agent pitchers. He's made that clear. But is this the offseason? Is this an offseason where the D-backs are going to go down that road again? I would be pretty surprised.
Yeah. I think it's pretty clear when the owner gets on the radio and says, we're going to spend less, they're going to spend less.
Yeah.
We don't really have to speculate too much. They're cutting. The only question is, how much are they cutting? I mean, Derek told us that over a month ago, and Derek Hall, and Ken Kendrick told us it just a little over a week ago. So I don't think there's any doubt about it. They're cutting payroll. And so that's going to give them less flexibility to be big players. But, look, maybe they spend big on starting pitching and then use trades to fill every other hole that they want to fill. They could go that route.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, is I think the way Mike talked about emphasizing defense, it's cheaper. It's cheaper to emphasize defense than it is to emphasize offense. So they're probably, going to stick with Blaze at third base. I mean, he really gave a lot of praise to Blaze during that press conference. And I think Blaze is basically the starting third baseman heading into spring training. Now, he probably can't afford to have a terrible camp, but I believe that Blaze is going to be the starting third baseman heading into next year. And they're really happy with his defense there. What they're going to do at first base and DH and left field remains to be seen, but maybe it's easier to fill those spots with, lower price free agents and trades. They need a closer, or they really need two starters and two high leverage relievers. When I asked Mike, are you going to pursue a closer? He kind of begrudgingly said, yeah, probably. And he said, we've been at our best when we have a closer. But you could just tell it was like pulling teeth to get him to say it. That's the forever debate between him and Torey Lovello. Torey wants a closer. Mike's front office believes that committee is fine. Look, and I get it. They're hesitant with limited resources to spend a lot of money on the bullpen, where the volatility is even greater than it is with these starting pitchers. So I totally understand their dilemma. I've been on that side of it, and I know it's really hard to figure that one out. So they certainly have my empathy when it comes to figuring out the hard part.
I know we're not trying to come up with an all-inclusive list by any means in terms of the frontline starters that are out there, but one name I will throw into the mix here, Jack, is Framber Valdez, of the longtime member of the Houston Astros. I know he was not on the list that you gave us earlier because he's entering his age 32 season, and he's on the older side as far as these free agent starting pitchers go. Certainly he would still command a long-term contract. But I think back to when Mike Hazen first joined this organization. I know it wasn't a move that he made, but the D-backs paid a whole lot of money for Zac Greinke, who also, I believe, was entering his age 32 season. And did it work out amazingly well for the team? No, but it didn't work out terribly either. I mean, Zac Greinke had some really good years in Arizona, and I wonder if a very aggressive version of Mike Hazen would consider someone like Framber Valdez, just given the continued success that this guy has had. I mean, Framber Valdez, year after year after year, he's generally been pretty durable. This year, he made 31 starts with a 3.66 ERA. He is not the best pitcher in baseball from a run prevention standpoint, but he is consistently one of the best starters in all of baseball. I'm just throwing names out there, Jack. What do you think of this guy?
Yeah, I just think that if they're going to spend big, I think they're going to go younger. That's all. I mean, maybe that's my preference and bias. I just think that they're not going to spend big on the guy that's already 32.
Yeah. That very well could be the case. Like Dylan Cease, his stuff is great, right? But he also had an ERA in the 4s this year in a pretty pitcher-friendly ballpark in San Diego. So it feels like when the D-backs do spend, they tend to favor stability over like top-end talent, right? Like Corbin Burns, certainly that guy. Like Eduardo Rodriguez, certainly the D-backs didn't sign him because his stuff was awesome. It was more so because he'd been a pretty steady pitcher in baseball for a long time. Similar story with Jordan Montgomery. Similar story with Madison Bumgarner. So I don't think Framber Valdez is exactly in the same camp as all those guys. Certainly, he would cost more than everyone except for maybe Corbin Burns himself. But I don't know, Jack. If you're gonna spend a crazy amount of money on starting pitching, which I don't think is gonna happen, but if it did, I could see a case for Framber Valdez.
Yeah, I can also see a case for why don't we try something different and go for the higher upside guy,
That's fair. Yeah,
right?
I get.
I mean, they go for these quote unquote steady guys and they either stink or get hurt. So let's just roll the dice and go for the upside guy and try to hit a home run.
Yeah, that's very fair. One other question we wanted to get to, switching gears from the pitching side of things and moving to the catching side of things. This one also comes from Reddit, from YEROC3103. With Jose Herrera electing free agency, which is a thing that happened recently, do we aggressively pursue re-signing James McCann, or is Adrian Del Castillo our backup catcher? Jack, I know this is something that you wrote about just recently. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'd absolutely encourage everyone to please check out the full article on Arizona Diamondbacks on SI that I wrote about James McCann. But I absolutely agree that they must try to re-sign him, even if it costs them $4 or $5 million. I mean, they're going to have to bring in a veteran backup catcher regardless. And this is not the time or place to save the $2 million. Like, a decent veteran backup catcher is going to cost you $2-3 million anyway. And so why not go the extra mile? This player, James McCann, was certainly somebody that everyone felt brought every possible intangible you could think. And I just kind of laugh at myself because I used to be like the anti-intangible guy until I got close to the game. I mean, I was, before I got close to the game and I was on the outside looking in, and pretty decent analyst by the numbers. But once I got close to the game, I realized the value of those intangibles and why they're so important. And James McCann has them. Things like, his ability to call a game and handle a pitching staff, and create a sense of comfort level with them. That's a really tough thing to quantify. And you can't even look at things like catcher ERA because it also depends on who's catching and which innings and who the opponents were. So that's a very volatile stat itself.
Yeah.
But if you listen to the pitchers and you listen to the coaches and you listen to the manager, there isn't a doubt in my mind that they should bring him back. He had a pretty good year at the plate. I wouldn't count on that again. But if he, I think his last 3 years or 4 years combined, it's like an 80-something OPS plus. He was above that this year. But if he gives you an 80, 85 OPS plus, I mean, Jose Herrera was a 52.
Right.
So 80, 85 is fine from your backup catcher as long as he's not a complete zero. And really, they need McCann very badly. Look, Gabriel Moreno has his games started at catcher and his innings caught has gone down every year. He went from 800 and something close to 900 down to 5 something. It's really hit 2 years straight of soft tissue injuries with shoulder and groin, and then this year some bad luck with the broken fractured finger. But bottom line is he's not a durable player.
Yeah.
And so and there are questions about his pitch calling, his whether or not he's handling the pitchers right. I mean, clearly there was very much an undercurrent of the pitchers being dissatisfied with Gabby's pitch calling, and that's probably why McCann drew so much praise on that front by comparison.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess with McCann, the big question is somebody going to give this guy starting catcher money? I mean, given the season he had with the Diamondbacks, I know it wasn't a huge sample size, but this is still a player who's worth one WAR in 42 games, at least according to Baseball Reference. He had a 107 OPS plus, and he drew widespread praise from the pitching staff, as you've been discussing. So, if the price tag gets beyond the, I don't know, 5 million range, if it's something even higher than that, I don't know if the D-backs are going to be willing to pay that when they already have I know there's some questions, but they do have one of the young, more desirable catchers in the game already in Gabriel Moreno.
Yeah, but they have nobody in the minor leagues to come up. Christian Serters didn't get above AA this year. They have nobody in AAA that they could bring up. Adrian Del Castillo has already been relegated to DH. They do not view him as a viable defensive catcher. Clearly,
Right.
Actions speak louder than words. They can say what they want, but you can see how they used him. And they were loath to put him behind the plate. I think he got 2 starts or something behind the plate, maybe 4, I don't know. But it was hardly anything. Look, I think the sticking point for McCann is going to be who gives him a second-year guaranteed. That's really what it comes down to. He's going in was he 35 this year? So 36, 37. That's a tough nut for any team to commit to, but that's going to be what it is. If anybody's willing to give him 2 years, he'll go there. That's what he's going to be seeking. He's going to be seeking a 2-year deal. It was tough for him to be stuck in the minors this year. We've kind of talked about it off the record a little bit. That wasn't fun for him. He views himself as a major league player. And so I think that's going to be the number one thing for him is who's going to give him guaranteed 2-year contract.
One way or another, the Diamondbacks, I think it's clear they need to address the backup catcher position. It's just a matter of, are you willing to give a 2-year contract to somebody who is really your second catcher? That's not something that we see teams do all that often, but this has been a thing for the D-backs for a while. They haven't invested in the backup catcher position at all for a number of years. Maybe that changes this offseason. But we have more questions to get to with regard to the Diamondbacks, the middle infield situation, some of the young prospects who could maybe step up and contribute there, as well as maybe some starting pitchers that they could target in the trade market. We're going to discuss that and more on the other side of this break.
FT fam, another reason why you should love Arena Club is the grading system. So you recently pulled a slab pack and then you said, hey, it's not graded. Grade it for me. They gave you an 8.5 out of 10 on your auto Whitey Ford card. And then they show you all the details of the grading system. It's very interactive within the app. And then you're done. If you want to sell the card or you want to know what it's worth, you've got it.
It's like getting taken to school on cards. And I think that's the coolest part of it. If you're young or old, you understand, hey, this is how it gets deciphered all the way through. It shows you the numbers and how they went through it. I think that's the coolest part about this whole thing. And then you can keep it traded or sell it, do whatever you want.
And it's so much more efficient to do this through Arena Club. Whether you're ripping a pack, there's the slab packs, buying a card, selling a card, grading a card. It's all there for you. We talk about it all season long. arenaclub.com/FOUL is where you can go to give it a shot. 20% off your first card purchase. arenaclub.com/FOUL. Use the code FOUL at checkout and get 20% off.
Well, as we are recording, the Dodgers have just closed out a 4-3 win over the Phillies in Game 2 of the NLDS. Man, the Phillies made that close, Jack, but somehow, some way, they were not able to do the thing against the Dodgers bullpen and complete the comeback. But yes, jumping back into the Diamondbacks world here. We mentioned potential trade candidates. This question comes from Ryan over on Twitter. Does the team have the farm depth to swim in the high-end trade space? Joe Ryan, Sandy Alcantara. Are there financial resources to pursue someone like a Michael King on the market, or should fan expectations be closer to projects like Brandon Woodruff? Well, we touched on the free agency piece a little bit earlier. Doesn't seem likely the D-backs would acquire someone like Michael King, but if they really wanted to be aggressive there, maybe they could allocate most of their resources to starting pitching and then use the trade market to fill some of their other gaps. But Joe Ryan is a name that certainly is intriguing, Jack. Not a household name, but he probably should be as a member of the Minnesota Twins. A 3.42 ERA this season with Minnesota, 4.5 baseball reference WAR. I know he hasn't been, he's not an elite starting pitcher. I guess maybe I should temper the expectations here a little bit, but he did have 194 strikeouts to 39 walks this year. I mean, the underlying numbers with Joe Ryan are pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's going to take you probably a couple of your top pitching prospects, probably going to cost you Daniel Egan, somebody like that. I mean, everybody probably just revolted at what I just said. But that's what it's going to cost. Like if you want 2 years control of a guy like, I think he's a free agent in 28, right?
Yeah.
So if you want
yeah,
2
two
years
more.
control of Joe Ryan, it's going to cost you at least one of your top pitching prospects, if not two, plus something else.
I kind of think that Jordan Lawler would have to be involved in that deal, at least someone of that. I mean, I think Daniel Egan's a great prospect. I think he had an awesome season. I don't think Daniel Egan and Cole Drake gets you Joe Ryan. I don't think those guys are. I don't think Drake has the ceiling that that a team like the Twins would probably be looking for. And Egan, I just don't think has proven it at a high enough level to where he's really a premium asset. Like I think it'd be a really strong complementary piece in a trade like this. But if I'm the Twins, I'm like, yeah, well, give me Jordan Lawler plus a couple of other nice things, and then we'll talk. I think Joe Ryan is one of the more highly sought after pitching commodities in the sport right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You're right. I guess I'm a Daniel Egan fanboy, so I'm probably overestimating his trade value a little bit.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, every team's gonna have their own evaluation of these guys. So who knows? Maybe the Twins are really high on Daniel Egan. Sandy Alcantara is another interesting name here. Jack did not have the season that people were expecting him to have coming off of surgery, but a 5.36 ERA in 31 starts. He did post. He did make the 31 starts. He threw over 170 innings. There's certainly something to be said for that. And he also finished the season pretty well. As the year went on, we started to see Alcantara look a little bit more and more like himself. Looking at his numbers here from his final 8 starts of the year, his ERA went down from 6.55 all the way to 5.36 in that span. So maybe you can dream on a really solid bounce back year from Alcantara, and he has a 2027 team option. So there's 1 year guaranteed, and then if you wanted to bring him back, you would have the option to do that. So 2 years of control there as well.
Yeah, I think with Sandy, I mean, if you look at his month-to-month splits, I mean, his ERA was over 8 in both April and May.
It was bad, yeah.
And then it was in the mid-4s in June and July. Like he was getting better, but he wasn't quite there. It was about 4.5 over 10 starts for June and July. And then over his final 10 starts, it was about 3.7 ERA. And the strikeouts kind of came back up, 61 in 65 innings, only 15 walks over his last 10 starts. So, again, this is actually a good cautionary tale for Corbin Burnes, right? I mean, Sandy took a while to regain his strength and get back in the groove.
Yeah.
Or his ability to pitch and be effective and throw strikes and not give up a ton of hits and homers. It just took him a while to get there. But yeah, certainly Sandy's, a possibility on the trade market. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in him because of the way he finished the season. I don't know exactly what the cost would be, but there is some history there with the Marlins, so they could maybe pull something off.
The other thing I'll mention here real quick is I think if the D-backs were willing to trade Ketel Marte, I mean, this is the kind of deal that you'd be looking for, right? I mean, if I'm the Diamondbacks and I am actually going to do the thing and I'm going to trade Ketel Marte, then I kind of have to get a good starting pitcher with some control. Like, I can't really imagine a world where the D-backs trade away Marte and it's like a justifiable move where you can talk yourself into that move making you better. I don't see it happening unless you get somebody like a Joe Ryan. It doesn't have to be Joe Ryan specifically, but I think it has to be that type of player, a guy who has proven something at the big league level, has some control left. You don't want just a 1-year rental. I think that's maybe the way that something like this could get done.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I'm trading Ketel Marte, I'm shooting a lot higher than Joe Ryan. I mean, it's got to be Joe Ryan plus something really, really good.
Yeah, I think realistically, would the Twins be on the same page there? I don't know. But I think it's a reasonable ask. I mean, given what Ketel has been the past few years, he theoretically is a a superstar level talent, and you'd hope to get a superstar type player in return from him. Is that going to happen? I don't really think so. I think it's going to be hard for the D-backs to get the best player in the trade if they do deal Ketel Marte. But you'd like to get as close as you possibly can, and yeah, maybe you are trying to shoot higher than a Joe Ryan at that point.
Yeah, I spoke about this last time. I mean, I don't think they trade Ketel because it's just too hard to make the right deal. It's just too hard to get the right return. As much as they need to fill in their pitching, maybe I'm all wet here. Maybe they're hell bent on trading him. Who knows? We don't really know what's behind the scenes there. I think reality already checked in on them. I think that there were some emotional reactions to what happened within the organization back in July, and I think that they've since kind of come to the realization that they really weren't going to be able to get a proper return for him, and so they'll back off that. I don't think they trade him.
Well, our next question has to do with the middle infield. So this would certainly be a much bigger question if the D-backs did trade Ketel. But this comes from Oh Hey It's Dan over on Reddit. The middle infield is feeling pretty solid with Perdomo's breakout year, but what would it take for Troy or Groover to muscle their way into the starting lineup next year? Jack, it's a little hard for me to imagine either of these guys being a starter toward the beginning of the season. I mean, I think something maybe has to go wrong for that to happen, but certainly Tommy Troy and Gino Groover both had solid years in the minors, and they're getting pretty close. It would not shock me if they were up in the big leagues at some point during the season. Whether they are offered a starting role, it feels like there would have to be an opening somehow. If an injury were to happen, something like that, that could maybe give them the opportunity to show what they can do.
I can see a pathway for Troy a lot more so than Groover, simply as you just mentioned. I mean, Groover hasn't played above AA yet. It would be a major upset for Groover to be on the major league roster to start the season. He should start the year in AAA, and if there are a lot of injuries, he could easily be up fairly soon in next year, depending on how he's doing and what the roster situation is. Tommy Troy, on the other hand, it's very intriguing. I mean, like, they moved him around a bit. They gave him some time in center field. A really hot spring training earned Blaze Alexander an opening day roster spot in 2024. I mean, what if Tommy Troy hits 400 and knocks 7 doubles and 3 homers in spring training? Maybe they put him on the roster as a utility player, or as an outfielder, or as an infielder, even if there isn't a major injury to open a door for him. So it could happen. I'm not expecting that. But there's certainly more of a pathway for him to be on the opening day roster if he's not traded. But I think that both, in the scenarios that we talked about, Troy and Groover could both also be assets that they need to move to improve the pitching staff.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think with Troy, I mean, the fact that he has only played 38 games in AAA, I feel like that probably makes it a little bit more of an uphill battle for him in spring training than it was for somebody like a Blaze Alexander who had more experience in AAA at that point. I also think it's worth mentioning that Troy had a 98 WRC plus in AAA this past year. So technically he was a below average hitter at the level. I know the numbers on surface look good at 295 average, and an OPS up over 800, but when you factor in the very hitter-friendly environment in Reno, he was basically a league average hitter in AAA. I think the D-backs will probably want him to start the season in AAA, almost regardless of what he looks like in spring training. But yeah, maybe an opportunity opens up for him at some point during the year, and he certainly has some positional versatility as well. We've heard about him maybe playing some center field. Is that something the D-backs would explore? Maybe that clears his path a little bit to get back to get to the big leagues in the first place. We have one other question we wanted to hit on here, Jack. This is a fun one. This also comes from Reddit. Where do the trio of Geraldo Perdomo, Corbin Carroll, and Ketel Marte rank amongst star trios of the league? Are there any other trios that come close to their production? And if there are, how did their team fare in the regular season? This is a fun question, Jack. It's something that you and I talked about. I think more so off the air down the stretch of the season. Like, is this team really going to miss the playoffs when they have 3 players performing at a star level? Like, this is not something that we see all that often. And sure enough, Jack, when you look around the league, I mean, there are not a lot of teams out there who got this kind of production from 3 position players.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to kind of parse this in different ways. One way we looked at it was simply looked at the OPS numbers. How many teams had 3 players with 135 or higher OPS plus, where the players all qualified for the batting title? In other words, over 502 plate appearances. The D-backs were the only team. They had 3, Pete Alonso and Juan Soto for the Mets. The Dodgers had Freddie Freeman and Shohei Ohtani, and the Cubs had Michael Busch and Kyle Tucker. Those are the only other teams that had 2 players, in other words, more than one above 135 OPS plus. So that right there kind of tells you a little something. And then we flip it over to looking at WAR. So Baseball Reference WAR, I looked at how many teams had at least 3 players, or who had the most players with 4 WAR or more. Now, the Cubs had 6. Michael Busch, PCA, Pete Crow Armstrong, Ian Happ, Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, and Kyle Tucker. A lot of defense in there. The Yankees had Cody Bellinger, Jazz Chisholm, and, of course, Aaron Judge. The Dodgers had Mookie Betts, whose bat wasn't there, but he had, I think, over 15 fielding runs. He was great at shortstop, so he crossed the 4 WAR threshold. Shohei Ohtani and Will Smith. Ironically, Freddie Freeman was not in that 4 WAR category this year. Toronto had Ernie Clement, Vlad Guerrero Jr., and George Springer. And then, of course, the D-backs, Corbin Carroll, Ketel Marte, and Geraldo Perdomo. Now, of the 5 teams that had 3 or more players to have 4 WAR or more, only the D-backs did not make the postseason, obviously, because they didn't have the pitching to get them there.
I took this question a little bit differently. I looked at just total WAR among your top 3 position players. And of course, Jack is the Baseball Reference guy among us, and I'm the Fangraphs guy. So of course, I looked at Fangraphs WAR instead of Baseball Reference WAR. And the D-backs were second, Jack. The only position player trio in all of baseball that produced more WAR than Perdomo, Carroll, Marte was Aaron Judge, Cody Bellinger, and Jazz Chisholm, a trio you just mentioned. And of course, it feels like kind of cheating because Aaron Judge produced more than half of this WAR all by himself, but that trio combined for 19.4 Fangraphs wins above replacement. Pretty crazy number there. But the D-backs trio is in second place. Perdomo, Carroll, Marte, 18.2 Fangraphs WAR between those 3 guys. And then the next trio is heavily propped up by another superstar in Cal Raleigh. It was Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, and Randy Arozarena of the Seattle Mariners. They combined for 17.7 Fangraphs WAR. And then there's a drop of about 2 WAR to get from third place to the next team, which is the New York Mets. Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso. That was the next trio on the list. So it's pretty impressive, Jack. I mean, Aaron Judge had an unreal season. Cal Raleigh had an unreal season. And both of those guys heavily carried these trio numbers. The fact that Perdomo, Carroll, and Marte were sandwiched right between those 2 teams, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to look at this stuff year to year, too. I mean, who knows what's going to happen next year. Maybe next year, Corbin Carroll, gets his on-base percentage up, and all of a sudden he's a 8 WAR player. And Ketel Marte stays healthy, and he gives you another 5 or 6. And, I don't expect Geraldo Perdomo to repeat 7 WAR. I do think that's likely to probably be his peak. But 4 or 5 WAR out of him is certainly right there within range. So, maybe the D-backs get back to 18 plus WAR again with those 3 guys, but it probably looks a little different.
Yeah. Well, it'll be a fun thing to keep track of next year. Maybe the D-backs are right in the thick of these rankings going into 2026 as well. But that is everything that we have for this extended mailbag, nearly hour-long edition of Snakes Territory. We appreciate all of you sticking with us. You can find us over on social media. I am at Jesse N. Friedman on Twitter. Jack is at ShoeWizard59, and our show is at Snakes Territory. Be sure to drop a like on this video, subscribe to our channel here on YouTube, leave us a comment. We would love to hear from you. We'll be here twice a week throughout the offseason. Always enjoy talking baseball with each and every one of you. And of course, Jack does a great job covering the Diamondbacks, creating all sorts of fun offseason content over at si.com/MLB/Diamondbacks. So be sure to check out his work over there. Thank you again to all of you for sticking with us on this episode. We really appreciate your time, and we'll be back with another episode of Snakes Territory very, very soon.